Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good afternoon. Today, we are honoured to have Yang Bahagia, Yang Berhormat, Senator Tengku Datuk Seri Utama Zafrul bin Tunku Abdul Aziz, Minister of International Trade and Industry. My name is Muzaffar. I have the privilege of moderating you today, sir. Our topic of objective today is discuss on the discussion of renewed opportunities post the pandemic and the raising industry competitiveness. Yang Berhormat, how are you? Okay.
Thank you.
Yang Berhormat, it has been a difficult 2 years inflicted by the pandemic, as we all aware. While the pandemic has set us back in many aspects positively, Malaysia has bounced back quickly, especially in attracting investments. In fact, 2021 was a record year, 306.5 billion worth of investments approved. That's up to about 83% year on year. While the 193.7 billion approved in the first 9 months of 2022 represents 2.5% year-on-year growth. To start off our conversation, Yang Berhormat, understand that earlier today, this morning, you announced Malaysia's investment performance for the full year of 2022. Yang Berhormat, if you can elaborate for the audience today, last year's performance and the investment trends over the last 2 years, and later on we can touch on FDIs and DDIs as well. Yang Berhormat, thank you.
First of all, thank you, Dato' Mus, for having me here today. It's good to be back at Invest Malaysia. It's been years ago that, physically. And it's good to be moderated by Dato' Mus, a long friend. He was actually my university mate in university, my roommate in university, ex-colleague in Maybank, and he told me, Zafrul, I'm not going to keep to the script. And I noticed he's the only Maybanker not wearing a Maybank tie. Even your CEO, no? But anyway, what Dato' Mus said is correct. I just came back from the MIDA conference where we announced our investment report, our IPR, where the year 2022 recorded one of the highest investments for Malaysia, although it's lower than 2021 due to 1 or 2 big major investments that came in 2021. But what I didn't announce today during the launch of the IPR is our target. The target of growth in terms of FDI or investments, total both FDI and DDI, we are projecting or targeting a 20% growth compared to what we have achieved in 2022. It's a tall order given the challenges, but I've always explained that investments is more long-term in nature. Companies that look at Malaysia will look at a longer time horizon. And although mindful of the challenges for 2022, I think 2023, the GDP forecast for this year, as announced by Yang Berhormat, Prime Minister, is going to be around 4.5%, relatively slower compared to what was achieved last year, given the challenges in globally. You can see the talk about geopolitics, Ukraine, Russia, the trade war, etc. So, but as a recap, what was announced today was the investments in Malaysia, in terms of approval, has touched 260 billion ringgit. And in terms of jobs, creating around 140,000 jobs for Malaysians. And if you look by sector, the biggest contributor to that investment is the services sector, followed by the manufacturing sector. And if you look at the breakdown between FDI and DDI, DDI continues to be very important. It was about 38% of the total. The remaining 62% is from FDI. So that DDI is actually about 101 billion ringgit. So if you look at moving forward, what's important is we get our act together to ensure that we can achieve that very aggressive 20% target of higher approved investment for the year 2023.
Yang Muhammad, 20% for FDI, DDI, that sounds like my board.
Sorry?
That sounds like my board. Sorry, Yang Muhammad. So we talk about a high target, Yang Muhammad. What else can we do to expand that pie? As you mentioned on service sector, we're now looking at the big names like Intel, Samsung, AMDs, recently on Amazon. Congratulations, Yang Muhammad, to you and your team as well. How do we remain competitive to bring these FDIs at a higher level? Obviously, there was a lot of action taken, but maybe you can elaborate further with the investors here today, Yang Muhammad.
Yeah. Looking at the total investments, both FDI and DDI, alhamdulillah, there have been quite a number of big major announcements in the past 2 weeks. I think Datuk Mus mentioned AWS, and we have a few others recently as well. But what's important is to keep the momentum going and focusing in the right sectors, the right industries, because the outcome that we want is not just the multiplier impact to our GDP, but also the creation of high quality jobs, which will result in higher income for fellow Malaysians and higher household income. Because if you look at what we've done, in any FDI, you must remember that we have competition. Competition obviously is getting stiffer. The gap is narrowing. Our neighboring countries are, to be fair, acting very fast. So we need to have effective economic policies. We need to work as one. Government alone cannot achieve what we want to achieve. It has to be a whole of a nation approach. And we need to make sure that we have a favorable investment environment and also act as regional promotion. We are now thinking about strategizing how Malaysia can actually be the gateway to investment in Asia. It's being formulated today. So something that we will be announcing in the third quarter is our new industrial master plan is being reviewed. And I hope together the collaboration with the various industries, Malaysia can move forward. And if you look at investments, even when we talk about services sector, it's actually in the ICT sector, the data centers, the last 3 major ones in Johor, for example, and of all the approved investments for the ICT sector, it's around 85 billion ringgit. So it is a major investments. One of it is, of course, ByteDance. As you know, ByteDance is the shareholder of TikTok. Many of you here are on TikTok, although you might deny that. But what's important is the fact that we are looking at most of this services sector is actually a spillover impact, a positive spillover impact to the economy.
Thank you, Muhammad. Ladies and gentlemen on the floor, we do have the Slido, and Yang Muhammad later we will take some questions. Because we're on the topic of the competitiveness, just now you mentioned, Yang Muhammad, the focus on the ICT. Can I just touch on the National Investment Policy that was launched last October? And maybe, Yang Muhammad, before I go to the questions, if we could look at the reform incentives. We heard about, Rafizi mentioned about innovation, ESG. Maybe on your lens, Yang Muhammad, as a meaty side in the attracting of the investments on innovation, ESG focus, and the green growth areas. What is in your lens, in your ministry, sir, that we looked at? It is a big lead across the ASEAN region as well, connecting with the China and the West as well. From your lens and your ministry, what are the action steps and focus that we could look at?
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
One thing that we have observed recently, and I think everyone here in the room also have seen, is the refocusing of a lot of the supply chain globally, basically. Yeah. Of course, it's as a result of various factors: the geopolitics, the trade tension, between China and US, what's happening in terms of the war in Ukraine. People are talking about supply chain resiliency. People are talking about ensuring that there is security of supply. There's talking about friendshoring, onshoring, reshoring. And again, where does Malaysia fit in all this, right? So we need to study and analyze this carefully and see how Malaysia can actually leverage of our position being a neutral country. Oh, welcome, Yang Berhormat Anthony Loke. I will try and keep it short for you to. Yeah, sorry. Is it okay to continue? Thank you. So if we look at, you mentioned just now, Dato' Mus, about the NIP, what's in there. Firstly, I think we must all agree that we need to reinvigorate Malaysia's trade and investment. That, I think, is clear. We have seen, I think this is quite interesting. Actually, I presented this to Yang Mohamad, PM, about the importance of trade and investment. I think most of you are in this room will know how GDP is calculated and how important trade, the X minus M, together with the investment part of the formula to achieve the higher GDP. And when you break it down in terms of total GDP, and you look at the variables arriving at that absolute number of GDP growth, the trade and investment portion have actually declined. So the trade and investment used to be 38% of our GDP, and that was in 2011. And today, well, not today, in 2021, from 38% is now 27%. So that means our reliance, although admittedly the GDP growth is still positive, it's quite strong, albeit during the pandemic it was negative, but the last 2 years, GDP growth of 3.1%, followed by GDP growth of 8.7%, but the contribution in terms of trade and investment has gone down, which means consumption and government spending was the driving growth, was driving GDP growth. So there is a need to clearly focus on trade and investments to make the GDP growth sustainable. And how do we do that? Of course, it's about improving productivity as well, about ease of doing business. I think everybody knows the formula to success, but also everybody knows the success of the formula is upon the success of the execution. So we need to ensure that when the execution is there, maybe we need to do a bit more work in terms of coordination, and because it's, like I said just now, it's a whole of nation approach. MET, together with other ministries in the government, Home Ministry, Labour Ministry, EPU, as you mentioned, and then with other agencies within those ministries, and not forgetting the economic corridors, and most importantly, even the states, the local councils. All these are, easier said than done. But investor, they don't care. They look at Malaysia. They don't care. There are various ministries, agencies, local councils that are involved in approving those decisions. So we need to look at it properly because the main success of the trade and investment contribution to GDP is actually productivity. Again, I don't like to highlight bad news in front of my fellow cabinet colleague, but there is a concern that our productivity rate, although in absolute term is higher than some of our neighbors, but in terms of productivity growth, we are slowing down compared to our neighbors. Hence, the gap is narrowing. So I just give you an example. If you look at the CAGR of last 10 years, 2011 to 2021, a CAGR for Malaysia productivity growth is 1.4% versus Singapore at 2.5%, Thailand at 2.5%, and Vietnam, which grew by 5%, and Philippines 3.5%. This is on productivity. Absolute terms, we are still higher than Thailand and Vietnam, for example, but in terms of growth, they are narrowing because their growth has been far better than Malaysia. Thank you.
Thank you, Yang Berhormat. I think productivity is an angle of conversation which is important. Yang Berhormat, to make my job be easier, I'm going to read some questions from the floor,
okay.
If you don't mind, and it is from the audience as well. I was hoping the audience would put their names and not just anonymous. Then it will not be fun, So at least Yang Berhormat know who asked the questions. Anyways, there's an anonymous question. What is MITI's position with regards to customized versus menu-based incentives for investors in EV?
What is MITI's, between customized
and versus menu-based?
Okay. Yes, I think these questions have, I mean, basically quite a few industry has asked us to be more menu-based so that they can prepare for pricing. Let's say cars, they want to know what are the incentives upfront so that they will then be able to price their product accordingly. And there are some more complicated industries are asking for us to be more customized because the incentives cannot, one shoe cannot fit all, right? So our position on customized versus menu-based initiatives, we are taking a more practical approach. So things that are more complex in nature requires a more customized approach, right? I think you as a wholesale bank head will know that you can't have the same solution for all your wholesale clients. So similarly, when you look at big investors coming in, they will have different areas that they want to focus on, hence the incentives have to be tailored accordingly versus a more retail or more products that are retail in nature. It's slightly easier than to have a menu base. So perhaps we can start with a menu base and then have a more flexibility to tailor-make some of the incentives and support that is required. But to me, at the end of the day, with the minimum global taxation coming, with various other incentives being more similar to other countries, what is important is the whole ecosystem that we have in Malaysia. The ease of doing business, we need to make sure that we really focus on this. Pemuda, which is agency or committee that's in charge, and MPC is the secretary, has to look at this deeper because at the end of the day, it's about ease of doing business, about talent pool, about the infrastructure, infrastructure both physical and non-physical, and about governance. These are the ingredients that will make a country successful or not in terms of attracting investments.
Thank you, Yang Mohamad. Talking about EV, there's a question as well, Yang Mohamad, on Tesla.
Oh, Tesla.
Is Tesla's under a customized incentive structure? What are the requirements? Is there a minimum investment commitment and special tax structure provided?
Yeah. These questions on Tesla, quite a number of people have asked, but I've never mentioned this number because it's quite interesting. Actually, I've got the number here that many of us may not know, but one of the reasons of Tesla coming to Malaysia is the fact that we have many, we have the ENE and semiconductor ecosystem quite established in Malaysia. It's been here over the 50 years. And in terms of Tesla, the number that I have here, can't seem to find the table, but if I remember offhand, the Malaysian companies that are supporting Tesla even today, right, is contributing close to 214 million ringgit of services to Tesla even today, right? So that's why one of the reasons why companies, a lot of companies that is involved in EV is coming to Malaysia because the supply chain is here, the ecosystem is strong enough here in terms of services, in terms of raw materials. And one must not forget that over the past 50 years, Malaysia has become the 7th largest in terms of market share in the world when it comes to semiconductor in the E&E space. So we then introduced this BEV, Battery Digital Vehicle Global Leaders Program, which is to help companies like Tesla to come in and develop their technology using the ecosystem that we have. So those are some of the things that we are doing it. But when you look at what Tesla is doing, they are not just putting their head office here, but they're also looking at working closely with the SMEs in the sector and putting in the charging system and various other support in terms of their sales and support office
Sorry,
as well.
Jamal, just now you're saying 240 million Tesla, the investments out of Malaysia currently now.
Yes.
Oh, that's fantastic.
That is
so you can imagine with them coming on board, the spillover will be definitely much higher.
Yes.
From
Actually,
that perspective.
people always say that, FDI versus DDI. Actually, FDI, there's a positive correlation to DDI. When a company like Intel, for example, comes in, there will be support from the SME. So the bigger the FDI, the local investors also will invest in the DDI to ensure that they can support the multinational. And once the local investor or local companies become larger, they can then export. Have you seen many of these companies, especially in Penang, who has benefited from this ecosystem, and they are now, not just publicly listed company, but they have been very successful in also playing the global game where they are supplying it to all the other multinational in other countries. Of course, our role in government is to ensure that we have that ecosystem to support both FDI and DDI.
Members of the audience, there's a lot of questions about EV and Tesla, so I'm going to put a pause on that because I've got about 7 minutes or so, and Yang Rahmat Anthony Lok will on the next session.
You got 3 minutes. Are you winding up today in the
Ibrahim has mentioned it's only 8 so it's okay.
3 p.m. Okay. The two of us are going back to Parliament to our winding up debate for the budget. Yeah.
So, Yang Rahmat, I think to the audience, there will be obviously exciting announcements on EV and the Tesla side. So I'll keep it paused there. Yang Rahmat, I want to touch back on productivity, maybe as a last question, and it was a very interesting point that you raised. I want to align with this question as well. What could the government do in terms of balancing the productivity growth and wage growth, as employers tend to put rewarding the staff as the, well, here it says last priority.
Yeah.
So maybe from your lens, Yang Rahmat, we talk about minimum wage, we talk about productivity, and maybe we could highlight that point, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, this is a very sensitive issue when we talk about minimum wage, etc. And of course, there's always two sides of the story. When you talk to the companies, especially the SME, they worry about the higher cost of the operation, given the labor cost has increased, and the inability to pass through some of that cost to customers, to buyers, etc. But at the same time, I think we need to be cognizant and mindful of the fact that income levels in Malaysia is also very low, right? If you ask any economists here, they will say that, yes, wages should increase, but in line with productivity, right? If the wages increase without a corresponding increase in productivity, then you become less productive, right? That's the formula. But I think sometimes, in theory it works, but in reality it doesn't, because there is always a substitution effect. Availability of cheap labor will, you assume that there's no availability of alternative labor coming in, a cheaper labor coming in. Therefore, companies will always have that ability to not invest in automation or 4IR. So then, therefore, productivity doesn't increase because you are not allowing us a minimum wage coming in. So I am, of course, in the support of ensuring that at the end of the day, in today's world, productivity really matters. It's going to be a driver in terms of growth, because when you come to new investments, the existing investments is equally important, right? Many companies are reinvesting in Malaysia, and that reinvestment must result in increase in productivity, because that is the only way, if you look in absolute terms and ringgit terms, of how the contribution to GDP is going to be. But more importantly, if you look at what the impact is to the rakyat, at the end of the day, it's all about the people in this room, is what is the impact to their income, right? Income levels have not risen as fast as it should be, right? And this also is worrying because the gap is also increasing, and we need to ensure that the government plays a role to balance this. In terms of what we've seen in the next 5 to 10 years globally, we are seeing new focus in new industries, but what's very clear is on ESG, right? Again, when you talk about productivity, we need to ensure that, even people in this room, I can see quite a number of institutional fund managers here, even their mandate now is being shifted more and more towards companies that are compliant with ESG. And similarly for our investors, when they invest in companies and for companies who are manufacturing products, they have to meet more and more stringent export conditions, global markets, which requires ESG. Today, someone asked me about what EU is doing on the carbon base adjustment mechanism, which has started this year. And this and many other issues will be challenging for some of the SMEs, if not really. We've talked about 4IR last time, now we have to talk about ESG. So at MITI, we are coming out with our industrial ESG framework for the manufacturing industry, which we hope to be announced or launched by early 2024.
Muhammad, thank you very much. I got one question, Muhammad. We've got a couple more minutes before Ibrahim Sani comes up with a notepad as well. Muhammad, you've been that side of the world once upon a time.
Yes.
The fund managers. You've been on our side of the world once upon a time. You're now...
That side of the world, our side of the world is the same.
They give us the fund and we'll sort it out later on. You're now a minister, Muhammad, from Ministry of Finance, now MITI. From the objective of our FDIs, the growth of the country, maybe in the next couple of minutes, Muhammad, how can we private sector and the government sector can complement one another, particularly for us in the financial institution as well? Maybe that could be a sum up for exciting half an hour session today, Muhammad. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. Yes, I still remember how it is like to be on that side, and now I'm with Anthony Lok's side, right? I'm talking about not politics, this works. I must say I'm much more happier with YB Anthony Lok now, because on the other side, I think you need to be more in line with your motto of humanizing financial services, right? Which was actually started during Tan Sri Wahid's time. So please humanize a bit more, help the rakyat more banks, record profits every year. So now you know where I stand. No, I was joking. Yeah, I can understand now why YB Anthony Lok feels the same way. But on a serious note, there is a lot of facilitation that's required. And one of the major challenges faced by SMEs is actually on financing, right? And to be fair, I know Bank Negara always share the numbers of how financial institutions, both commercial and development banks, have been assisting in giving the funding. But the challenge will be new industries, new areas of growth, requires new thinking of how credit facilitation should happen. And I think the role is not just for the banks, but the role is for the private equity investors, mezzanine investors, angel investors. I think the whole ecosystem has to play. And we have in Malaysia, in my view, a very deep market. We have a very mature market. So the exit is there for investors, but we need to strengthen more the initial stages of funding. Because for investments to come into Malaysia, we need to support as well the whole ecosystem that supports the investment that comes in. Many companies in Malaysia, when the foreign investors come in or large national companies come in, we try and draw a program where SMEs can come in to be part of that supply chain. But those SME will then require investments from their investors, but more importantly, from capital market later on, but banks need to play a role as well in this growth. And if you look at where we are today, I must say that every company has its own challenges when it comes to raising funding. But what's important is that we continue to engage. For me, try to bridge the gap between what is expected from the SME and from the industry and what is expected from the bank. So we have a committee recently, a task force under Industry Forward, where we look at how we can assist companies and be the bridge to some of the standards that's required when it comes to funding. So I think some of the banks have participated in that task force. So I'll thank them very much. But what's important is we need to ensure, I mean, I've said this many times, that the impact, what is the outcome? The outcome, we want to have a growth for Malaysia, GDP growth that's coming, but a GDP growth that is also inclusive, right? We don't want to see a GDP growth that is driven by certain sectors, certain companies. We want it to be as inclusive, as wide as possible, the impact, and we want to see that our GNI cross the high income. Our GNI, the high income GNI is $13,000 US dollars per capita, and it's been hovering 11,000 for the last 10 years, right? So we need to also see how investments and things that we do increase our household income, increase the income levels of Malaysians, so that we can then achieve our high income status as a nation.
Yeah, Mohammed, we wish you all the very best. Ladies and gentlemen, can we give a round of applause and appreciation to Yang Mohammed Tengku Datuk Seri Zafrul. Thank you very much for your time, sir. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you.
Waalaikumsalam.